Let me take you back to a moment in my life that feels like a scene ripped straight out of a twisted drama series. My name is Alex Carter, and this story begins not with a bang but with the suffocating weight of betrayal, a betrayal so deep it left scars I still carry today. Growing up in suburban Chicago, Illinois, I thought family was supposed to mean something. But for me, family became a word soaked in hypocrisy, neglect, and outright cruelty. It all started when I was just 8 years old. That's right, 8. Do you remember what your life looked like at that age? For most kids, it's filled with laughter, schoolyard games, and bedtime stories. For me, it was the year my father decided I wasn't worth his time anymore. My mom had passed away barely 6 months earlier in a devastating car accident on Interstate 94. She'd been rushing to pick me up from Lincoln Elementary School after I missed the bus, a simple act of love that ended her life. A drunk driver slammed into her car at a crossroads near the school, and just like that, she was gone. Forever. The pain of losing her was unbearable, but what made it worse was how my dad handled, or rather, didn't handle, it. Instead of comforting me or stepping up as a parent, he distanced himself completely. Within weeks, he remarried Marissa Thompson, a former flight attendant who wore enough makeup to rival a runway model and carried herself like she owned the world. At first glance, she seemed polished and charming, but beneath that fake smile lay a manipulative woman who viewed me as nothing more than an inconvenient reminder of my dad's past life. By the time I turned 9, Dad shipped me off to St. Andrew's boarding school in Milwaukee, a decision he claimed was for my own good. His exact words were, "You'll get a better education there, son." Better education? Sure. But let's call it what it really was, abandonment. He sent me away because Marissa didn't want to deal with raising someone else's child. And honestly, why would she? She already had plans to build her perfect little family with my dad, and soon enough, they welcomed Ashlyn into the world. Ashlyn, or Ash, as everyone calls her, is 5 years younger than me and has always been Daddy's little princess. Spoiled rotten since birth, she could do no wrong in his eyes. Meanwhile, I was treated like an outsider, a shadow lurking in the corners of their shiny new life. Every holiday visit home felt like walking onto a movie set where I didn't belong. The tension between us grew thicker each year, especially as Ash blossomed into her teenage years. By the time she hit college, she was living a lifestyle that would make even Hollywood blush. Escort services, OnlyFans modeling, you name it, she dabbled in it. Yet somehow, in my dad's delusional mind, she remained his pride and joy. Fast forward to last month, and here we are. After years of hard work, I finally achieved one of my biggest dreams, buying my very own house. It wasn't anything extravagant, a modest 2-bedroom bungalow tucked away in Oak Park, but it was mine. Mine. For the first time in my life, I felt a sense of stability and accomplishment. I invited them over for a housewarming party, thinking maybe, just maybe, they'd see how far I'd come and feel proud of me too. Boy, was I wrong. Dad showed up late, dressed in his usual expensive suit, while Marissa clung to his arm like a parasite. Ash trailed behind them, scrolling through her phone without so much as a glance at my new place. As we toured the house, Dad barely acknowledged the effort I'd put into decorating. Instead, he criticized everything, the furniture, too cheap, the color scheme, too bland, and even the neighborhood, not upscale enough. But the real bomb dropped later that evening. I received a call from him the next week. He said he needed to talk urgently, so naturally, I agreed to meet. When I arrived home that evening after a long day at work, I found movers packing my belongings into boxes. Boxes? My heart sank as I realized what was happening. Without consulting me, Dad had hired these men to clear out my house, all because he wanted Ash to move in. Apparently, she was pregnant, and instead of helping her figure things out responsibly, he expected me to hand over my hard-earned sanctuary without question. Standing there, watching strangers load my life into trucks, I felt rage bubbling inside me. How dare he? How dare they? This wasn't just about a house, it was about respect, boundaries, and the complete disregard for everything I'd worked so hard to achieve. In that moment, I knew our fractured relationship had reached its breaking point. Ashlyn Carter, or Ash, as she preferred to be called, was a walking paradox. At just 29 years old, she had already managed to burn every bridge she crossed while simultaneously clinging to the fragile hope that someone would come along to rebuild them for her. Standing at 5 feet 6 inches with dyed platinum blonde hair and piercing blue contacts, Ash carried herself like she was auditioning for a reality TV show rather than navigating real life. Her Instagram bio read, "Living my best life, gemstone sparkles," but behind the curated selfies and filtered photos lay a story far darker than anyone could imagine. From the moment she was born, Ash had been Marissa's masterpiece, a living doll crafted to embody everything Marissa believed a woman should be: beautiful, carefree, and financially dependent on men. Growing up in the affluent suburbs of Chicago, Ash was showered with designer handbags, expensive spa treatments, and endless lectures about how women didn't need careers. Men will take care of you if you know how to play your cards right, Marissa often whispered during their weekly shopping sprees at Neiman Marcus. These words became the foundation of Ash's worldview, shaping her into someone who viewed relationships not as connections but as transactions. By the time Ash turned 19, she had already dropped out of community college, claiming it was too stressful and that her modeling dreams were more important. Modeling, however, proved harder than she anticipated. After countless rejections from agencies in downtown Chicago, Ash grew desperate. That's when Marissa stepped in, not with advice on perseverance or self-improvement, but with a toxic pep talk. "You're young, gorgeous, and have something most men want. Use it wisely," Marissa said one evening over wine at their Oak Park home. It wasn't long before Ash started accepting dinner invitations from older men, charging $300 for companionship under the guise of friendship. But Ash's descent into escorting wasn't just about money, it was also about validation. Each transaction made her feel powerful, desirable, even invincible. Yet beneath the surface, she was crumbling. The same arrogance that fueled her bravado masked deep insecurities. She craved love but settled for fleeting attention, mistaking lust for loyalty. By the age of 25, Ash had racked up debts totaling $45,000 on credit cards, mostly spent on designer clothes and cosmetic procedures to maintain her perfect image. Her OnlyFans page, launched in 2021, barely brought in $800 a month despite her promises of exclusive content. "I'm trying," she once told me defensively when I questioned her choices. But trying wasn't enough, not when survival depended on exploitation. Then came the pregnancy, a bombshell that shattered whatever semblance of stability Ash thought she had. When I first heard the news, I assumed it was another ploy to secure financial support. But sitting across from her at a quiet coffee shop near Millennium Park, I realized there was more to the story. With tears streaming down her face, Ash confessed that her boyfriend, the man she truly loved, had left her after discovering her double life. Not only did he break up with her, but he also uploaded private photos of her onto Reddit, tagging her location and exposing her secrets to the world. Overnight, Ash went from being a struggling model to a viral scandal. The betrayal cut deeper than expected. As it turned out, this boyfriend, a barista named Jake, had undergone a vasectomy 2 years prior. He admitted he never wanted children and accused Ash of lying about her intentions. "He called me selfish," Ash sobbed, clutching her latte like it was a lifeline. "But I didn't know. I swear I didn't know." Her voice trailed off, choked by guilt and despair. For the first time, I saw vulnerability in her eyes, something raw and unfiltered. It was heartbreaking. What followed was a whirlwind of emotions. Initially, Ash decided to terminate the pregnancy, booking an appointment at a clinic in Evanston. But as the days passed, doubt crept in. Late one night, she showed up at my door, visibly distraught. "I can't do it," she cried, collapsing onto the couch. "It's wrong. I don't deserve this punishment." Her words echoed through the room, heavy with regret. Despite everything, Ash still clung to the hope that someone, anyone, would save her from herself. Her plea for help forced me to confront my own feelings. Part of me wanted to walk away, to let her face the consequences of her actions. But another part, a smaller, quieter part, felt sorry for her. Beneath the layers of manipulation and entitlement was a lost girl searching for meaning in all the wrong places. Whether redemption was possible remained uncertain, but one thing was clear: Ash's life was unraveling faster than anyone could predict. If there was ever a woman who embodied the phrase, "beauty is only skin deep," it was Marissa Carter. At 58 years old, she still clung to the remnants of her youth, or at least what plastic surgery could salvage. Her face was a patchwork of overdone procedures, lips so plump they looked like balloons ready to burst, cheekbones unnaturally sharp, and eyes stretched too wide by countless blepharoplasties. To strangers, she might have passed as glamorous, but up close, her features were unsettling, a grotesque caricature of beauty. This obsession with appearance wasn't just vanity, it was a desperate attempt to hold on to relevance in a world that had long stopped caring. Marissa's story began decades ago when she worked as a flight attendant for United Airlines. Back then, she was undeniably stunning, tall, poised, and radiating confidence. Men flocked to her like moths to a flame, including my father. Their affair started during one of his frequent business trips to Miami. At the time, my mother was still alive, though their marriage was strained. My dad, always self-centered, saw nothing wrong with pursuing Marissa while my mom struggled to keep our family together. He justified it by telling himself he deserved happiness, conveniently ignoring the pain he inflicted on those around him. When my mom passed away in that tragic car accident, Marissa wasted no time inserting herself into our lives. Within months, she moved into our Oak Park home, redecorating every room to suit her taste. She replaced my mom's warm, cozy furniture with sleek, minimalist pieces that felt cold and unwelcoming. It wasn't just the house she transformed, it was the entire dynamic of our family. From day one, Marissa made it clear I was an inconvenience. She didn't want to raise another woman's child, especially not a boy who reminded her constantly of my dad's past life. So, when I turned 8, she convinced him to send me off to St. Andrew's boarding school in Milwaukee. It'll be better for him, she assured my dad, masking her true intentions behind a veil of concern. In reality, she simply wanted me out of the picture. As the years went by, Marissa tightened her grip on my dad and Ash. She ran our household like a dictator, controlling everything from finances to family decisions. Every conversation revolved around her needs, her opinions, her desires. If anyone dared challenge her authority, she retaliated with passive-aggressive comments or outright tantrums. Her influence over Ash was particularly toxic. From a young age, Marissa drilled into Ash's head that women didn't need careers, they needed rich men. "Why work hard when you can marry well?" she'd say, sipping champagne at brunches in downtown Chicago. These words shaped Ash into the person she became today, lost, dependent, and morally adrift. But beneath Marissa's polished exterior lay secrets darker than anyone could imagine. For starters, she had been cheating on my dad for years, with none other than her yoga instructor, a man named Greg. Standing at 6 feet 2 inches with chiseled abs and a charismatic smile, Greg was everything my dad wasn't: younger, more physically fit, and seemingly attentive. They met 3 years ago at Serenity Yoga Studio in Evanston, where Marissa claimed to attend classes daily. What my dad didn't know was that these classes often ended with private sessions in Greg's car or late-night rendezvous at his apartment. I discovered this betrayal purely by accident. One Sunday afternoon, after noticing how frequently Marissa disappeared under the guise of yoga, I decided to follow her. Driving discreetly behind her BMW X5, I trailed her to a quiet alley near Lincoln Avenue. There, I watched in disbelief as she climbed into Greg's Tesla, laughing flirtatiously before they drove off together. Shaking with anger, I parked my car and filmed their interaction when they returned 2 hours later. The footage showed them kissing passionately, completely oblivious to the world around them. It was damning evidence, and I knew exactly how to use it. The breaking point came a few days later when my dad called me to meet him at O'Hare Brewery, a local pub we occasionally visited. Sitting across from him, I noticed the weariness etched on his face. His once confident demeanor had faded, replaced by uncertainty and regret. Sensing an opportunity, I slid my phone across the table and pressed play. The video unfolded silently, but the expressions on my dad's face said it all. Shock turned to disbelief, then rage. "How long has this been going on?" he demanded, slamming his fist on the table. I shrugged, letting the truth sink in. That night, chaos erupted at the Carter residence. My dad confronted Marissa in the kitchen, holding my phone like a weapon. "Explain this," he shouted, thrusting the screen toward her. Marissa froze, her perfectly manicured hands trembling as she stared at the footage. For a moment, she tried to deny it, claiming it was fake or edited. But the evidence was undeniable. Cornered, she finally admitted everything, not just the affair, but also her plan to divorce my dad and take half of his assets through a prenuptial agreement loophole. "You think I stayed with you all these years because I loved you," she sneered, her voice dripping with venom. "I stayed because you're useful." The fallout was catastrophic. My dad, humiliated and heartbroken, ordered Marissa and Ash to leave the house immediately. Packing their belongings into suitcases, they moved into a cramped studio apartment in Logan Square. Meanwhile, my dad spiraled into depression, questioning every decision he'd ever made. Sitting in his study one evening, surrounded by empty whiskey bottles, he confessed something shocking: Marissa wasn't even the first woman he'd betrayed my mom with. Before her, there had been others, brief flings, meaningless encounters, all while my mom remained loyal to him. "I ruined everything," he muttered, tears streaming down his face. "Your mom, she deserved better." Watching my dad crumble was both satisfying and heartbreaking. On one hand, he deserved every ounce of pain for the way he treated my mom and me. On the other hand, seeing him reduced to a shell of his former self reminded me of the fragility of human relationships. Love, trust, loyalty, all of it could vanish in an instant, leaving behind only bitterness and regret. The unraveling of the Carter family began on a cold Tuesday evening in December. My dad, Michael Carter, sat at the kitchen table in our Oak Park home, scrolling through his phone with an expression that oscillated between disbelief and rage. He had stumbled upon something he wasn't meant to see: a series of text messages between Marissa and her yoga instructor, Greg. The conversation was damning. "I never loved you," Marissa wrote. "You were just a meal ticket, a way to secure my future." Her words cut deeper than any knife ever could. For years, Marissa had played the role of the perfect wife, but now her true colors were exposed. She hadn't married my dad out of love, she had married him for his wealth. Worse still, she had been cheating on him for years while manipulating him into believing their marriage was solid. When Dad confronted her later that night, Marissa didn't even try to deny it. Instead, she smirked, her overly plump lips curling into a sneer. "What did you expect?" she spat. "You're old, boring, and completely oblivious. Did you really think I stayed with you because I cared?" But Marissa's betrayal was only the tip of the iceberg. That same week, another bombshell dropped, this time involving Ash. A close friend of my dad's, Richard, called him early one morning, his voice trembling with anger. "Michael, I can't believe this," Richard said. "Your daughter, she scammed me out of $15,000. It turned out Ash had posed as a wealthy socialite online, luring Richard into investing in what she claimed was a lucrative business venture. In reality, the money went straight into her OnlyFans account and bankrolled her extravagant lifestyle. Richard, feeling betrayed and humiliated, filed a police report against her. When Dad heard the news, he collapsed onto the couch, his face pale and his hands shaking. For the first time in years, I saw vulnerability in his eyes, a raw, unfiltered pain that mirrored my own feelings growing up. He had spent decades prioritizing his own desires over the needs of others, but now karma had come knocking, forcing him to confront the consequences of his actions. His delusions about Ash, the perfect daughter who could do no wrong, shattered in an instant. The woman he thought was his pride and joy was nothing more than a con artist living off lies and deceit. That evening, Dad gathered us all in the living room. Marissa and Ash sat side by side on the couch, their faces etched with fear and defiance. Dad stood in front of them, his posture rigid, his voice trembling with emotion. "I've made so many mistakes," he began, his words heavy with regret. "I neglected Alex when he needed me most. I let Marissa control everything, including how I treated my own son. And Ash," he paused, swallowing hard. "Ash, I failed you too. I turned a blind eye to your behavior because I wanted to believe you were better than this." His confession stunned everyone, including me. For years, I had resented him for his selfishness and hypocrisy, but now I saw a man broken by his own choices. Still, forgiveness didn't come easily. As much as I wanted to believe he was sincere, I couldn't ignore the scars he had left on my life. When he asked if I would consider moving back home, I hesitated. "Dad," I said finally, "I appreciate the apology, but I need time to process everything. This isn't something I can just forget." The tension in the room was palpable. Marissa glared at me, her claw-like nails digging into the armrest of the couch. "You always ruin everything," she hissed under her breath. But Dad silenced her with a sharp look. "Enough, Marissa," he snapped. "This is your fault as much as anyone else's." Turning back to me, he added, "Alex, I know I don't deserve your forgiveness, but I'm willing to do whatever it takes to make things right. Please, give me a chance." Despite his plea, I remained conflicted. On one hand, I felt a flicker of hope that maybe, just maybe, we could rebuild our relationship. On the other hand, the wounds ran too deep, and trust would take years to repair, if it could be repaired at all. As I left the house that night, I couldn't shake the image of Dad sitting alone in the dimly lit living room, his head buried in his hands. It was a stark reminder of how quickly fortunes could change, and how merciless karma could be. Meanwhile, Marissa and Ash packed their belongings into suitcases, preparing to leave the house they had once dominated. Their destination? A cramped studio apartment in Logan Square, where they would have to start from scratch. For Marissa, it was a bitter pill to swallow. After years of living lavishly at my dad's expense, she now faced the harsh reality of financial instability. As for Ash, the weight of her decisions finally caught up with her. With legal troubles looming and no stable income, she realized she couldn't rely on her looks or charm to get by anymore. Yet, amidst the chaos, a strange sense of justice prevailed. Karma had struck hard, exposing the truth and holding each person accountable for their actions. My dad, once arrogant and self-centered, was forced to reckon with his failures as a father and husband. Marissa, whose greed and manipulation had torn the family apart, was cast out with nothing but her shattered dreams. And Ash, whose reckless lifestyle had spiraled out of control, was left to face the consequences of her choices. As I drove away from the house that night, I couldn't help but reflect on the events that had unfolded. Was this the end of our family drama, or merely the beginning of a new chapter? One thing was certain, the road ahead wouldn't be easy, for any of us. In the weeks that followed the family's collapse, a fragile sense of order began to emerge. My dad, Michael Carter, now living alone in a modest apartment in Logan Square, started showing signs of change, subtle but undeniable. For the first time in years, he listened without interrupting. He asked questions instead of issuing commands. When I visited him one rainy afternoon, he greeted me with a cup of coffee and an apology. "I've been a terrible father," he admitted, his voice heavy with regret. "Not just to you, but to Ash too. I let my selfishness blind me." His words carried weight, but forgiveness wasn't something I could offer lightly. The scars of abandonment ran deep, and trust would take time to rebuild, if it ever fully did. Still, I appreciated the effort. Over the next few months, Dad made small but meaningful gestures. Sending me articles about career development, asking about my hobbies, and even attending one of my work presentations at a local tech conference in downtown Chicago. It was awkward at first. He didn't quite understand what I did for a living, but his presence mattered more than anything else. As for Ash, she faced her own reckoning. After moving into a tiny studio apartment in Evanston, she struggled to adapt to life without Marissa's financial support or my dad's blind indulgence. One evening, she called me, her voice trembling with desperation. "I need help," she confessed. "I can't do this alone." Though part of me wanted to turn her away, to let her face the consequences of her choices, I couldn't ignore the vulnerability in her tone. She wasn't the same arrogant woman who had once dismissed me. She was scared, lost, and genuinely remorseful. I decided to help her, but on my terms. Together, we enrolled her in a 6-month graphic design course at Oakton Community College. It wasn't modeling or escorting, but it was a start, a chance for her to build a stable future. In return, she promised to cut ties with her toxic past. No more OnlyFans, no more late-night rendezvous, and no more relying on men for money. "You're better than this," I told her during one of our conversations. "But you have to prove it, not just to me, but to yourself." The road ahead wasn't easy for any of us. Dad continued to grapple with guilt, often calling me late at night to talk about his regrets. "I ruined everything," he'd say, his voice cracking. "Your mom, she deserved so much better." These moments reminded me of the fragility of human relationships, the way love, trust, and loyalty could shatter under the weight of poor decisions. Yet, amidst the pain, there were glimmers of hope. Dad joined a therapy group for divorced men, where he learned to process his emotions and take responsibility for his actions. Slowly but surely, he began to rebuild himself. For Ash, progress came in fits and starts. Some days, she thrived, excitedly sharing sketches from her design class or talking about her dreams of starting a small business. Other days, she faltered, overwhelmed by self-doubt and fear of failure. But through it all, she persevered, determined to break free from the cycle of destruction she had inherited from Marissa. By the end of her course, she landed a part-time internship at a marketing firm in Skokie, earning $18 an hour, a modest income, but enough to cover her expenses and save for the baby. Marissa, meanwhile, faded into obscurity. After being evicted from my dad's house, she disappeared from our lives entirely. Rumors circulated that she had moved to Florida with Greg, her yoga instructor, but neither confirmed nor denied the claims. Her absence left a void, but also a lesson, that greed and manipulation ultimately lead to isolation. As I reflected on everything that had happened, I realized that while karma had dealt its blows, it hadn't destroyed us. Instead, it forced us to confront our flaws and seek redemption. The journey wasn't over, we still had miles to go before we could truly heal, but we had taken the first steps toward reconciliation. In the end, I learned that family isn't defined by blood alone, it's shaped by the choices we make and the effort we put into repairing broken bonds. Honesty, accountability, and compassion are the cornerstones of any meaningful relationship. And though our story may not have a fairy tale ending, it has something far more valuable, a second chance. As the dust settled on our family's chaos, I couldn't help but reflect on the people who had played supporting roles in this twisted drama. Take Greg, Marissa's yoga instructor and secret lover, for example. A closer look revealed he wasn't just your average fitness guru, he was a professional con artist with a trail of broken hearts and bank accounts stretching across Illinois. Before meeting Marissa, Greg had scammed at least 3 women out of their life savings, using his charm and chiseled abs to lure them into fake investments. He's like a walking infomercial, one of his victims once joked bitterly during a support group meeting. Yet, despite his polished exterior, Greg's greed eventually caught up with him. When Marissa discovered he was still seeing other clients, even ones willing to pay more than her, she cut him off entirely. Karma, it seemed, had a way of turning even the slickest operators into desperate men. Then there was Ash's ex-boyfriend, Bob, the barista-turned-accidental detective. After learning about Ash's OnlyFans page and escorting career, Bob decided to take legal action. He filed a lawsuit against her, claiming she had defrauded him out of $8,000 under false pretenses. The case made headlines in local Chicago papers, painting Ash as both victim and villain. While some sympathized with her predicament, others saw her as a cautionary tale about the dangers of living a double life. Faced with mounting pressure, Ash begged me to intervene. "You're the only one who can fix this," she pleaded, tears streaming down her face. Though part of me wanted to let her face the consequences, I knew stepping aside would only deepen the rift between us. So, I hired a lawyer, not because I believed she deserved special treatment, but because sometimes, protecting family means giving them a chance to grow. In the end, these stories served as reminders that every action has lasting repercussions. Whether it was Greg's schemes unraveling or Bob's quest for justice, the ripple effects of their choices shaped not only their lives but ours as well. As I sat alone in my modest Oak Park apartment, staring at the city skyline through my window, I realized something profound. Karma isn't just punishment, it's an opportunity to rebuild. And maybe, just maybe, that's where true redemption begins.